That video is talking about a portion in Scripture where the prophet is just shocked at the reality that people once knew God in their life and then chose something else in place of God. And really, it's always about choices. It's always about priorities, whether you've known God and you have to continue to choose whether to stay with God or whether you haven't really known God at all in your life. There's still some priority that is most valuable to you. Today we're going to talk about Grant at 20, and this is a story that you've heard before. You haven't heard this particular story or word for word this story, but you know the scenario, the plot that we're going to talk about today. Grant at 20, who hates his job and would love to get another job, but he's burnt a lot of bridges in his lifetime already at 20, and all the bridges that he's burned make it difficult or near impossible for him to get a better job. You know, the job that he would like to have requires education possibilities that aren't open to him, because he really blew it in high school when it comes to his grades. And so he can't get scholarships, and he can't even really go to his parents and ask for money for the school that he wants to go to, because he's burnt that bridge too. Parents are very loving to him, but over and over and over, he has proven to be disrespectful and has thrown every generous offer that they've given kind of back in their face and has used it for something selfish. And so at this time in his life, they're currently exercising what we know as tough love. And they are purposely, heartbreakingly keeping a distance from him, hoping that the distance will help him figure out life. And on top of everything else that he's struggling with, there's that check writing thing that happened the day that he was old enough to get his own bank account. And the reason why he got checks for that account was because he had this idea that I can just write checks. And so he wrote checks. And there wasn't money to cover it, but boy, was it great when it was great. But now he's got a record, and I don't mean a recording contract. I mean he's got a record with the police to add on top of everything else. Grant at 20 is struggling with what he would really like to do that's not available to him now, and the record. And then, you know, there is a child somewhere that just, there was a girlfriend in high school, and right after high school ended, had a child, but Grant being Grant messed up that opportunity, and not even sure how or why it's all worked out this way, but that girl, he doesn't even know where she is. And his child doesn't know, has no influence, no connection with this child. Grant at 20. And interestingly enough, he has very few friends, and that's odd because in high school, he was the most popular kid in school, without a doubt. There was nobody even close. But the thing was that for Grant, popularity was his goal. Popularity was the reason why he was in school. And so for that 3 or 4 year window, popularity being the goal, he got it. He was very popular, and Grant would do anything to get that popularity. He would be anything. He would say anything to be popular, and he got it. Grant was very popular, most popular. You know, one of those kids that when they get their diploma, there's like the audience breaks out in applause, and it's uncomfortably long. You know, people are saying there's other people to graduate here, and so doesn't get near that applause. But Grant was that guy. And then he graduated. And Grant at 20 now looks back and says, you know, that was wonderful for that 3 or 4 years in school. Like, I had this environment that I could kind of control by doing anything and saying anything and being anything to gain popularity. And that was sort of my place. And everybody, you know, that came to school the same day, and I was sort of like the king of the court. But once he got that certificate and the applause, that environment was gone. Because Grant graduated, and so did the rest of his class. And you can't go back to high school. You can't live there. You can't say, hey, that was great. Can I just go back and stay there? You can't, because life moves on. And everybody moved on from that moment. And Grant is now 20, and he's kind of stuck. It was great for 3 or 4 years, but he's stuck. So the question that you would ask, Grant, if you had the chance, would be this. Why would you give up your future for 3 or 4 years of school? Why would you give up your future so that you could be that do anything, say anything guy for 3 or 4 years? Why would you give all of that up? And this idea comes up in the book of Mark. We've been studying in the book of Mark week by week now for a little while, and Jesus brings up this thought that Grant at 20 is struggling with. He brings up this thought, and he says this in Mark chapter 8, verses 36 and 37. He says, now what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? And if he was talking to Grant at 20, he would kind of narrow that down, and he would say, what good is it, Grant, for someone to have popularity in high school yet have nothing at graduation? How much have you given in exchange for your popularity, Grant? But you know, this doesn't just have to do with Grant at 20. This has to do with you and me. And so if God was addressing that question in Mark to us, he would say, what good is it for you to have money and status and things and a job that you just live for and you make that your only thing? What good is it for you to have all of this stuff if one day you end up losing your soul? Because those things, or that thing, was more important than the one who wants to be the king of your heart. Or how much would you be willing to give in exchange for your soul? How much money would you be willing to give in exchange for your soul? You're in that 3 or 4 year window of life compared to eternity. This is like the 3 or 4 year window of high school. You're in that window right now. How much money would be worth it, would be more valuable than your eternity? What kind of status would be worth trading for your soul? Now, Jesus tells this story in Mark chapter 9, fully knowing that he's challenging his disciples, because his disciples were at this point where they're kind of wondering, is it worth giving up the things that we have to give up to follow Jesus? I mean, it could be so much easier not to have to face the criticism of the crowd. It would be so much easier not to be a servant and a disciple of Jesus. Is it worth that? And so Jesus asks them, well, is it? And so just one chapter later, not very long after this, a man approaches Jesus. And it says, as Jesus started on his way, a man ran up to him, and he falls on his knees. And he says, good teacher, what must I do to go to heaven? And this is kind of the question that you have. This is kind of the question that Grant has. For Grant, I don't know if he was ever asked that question as a young person. I don't know if he ever thought of spiritual things. But for Grant, he probably would have said, I will choose popularity over God. I'll choose to do anything, be anything, say anything person over anything else. And so this guy falls at Jesus' knees, and he says, what do I need to do? And so Jesus says, look, you know the Ten Commandments. You know they have to do, like, you shall not murder, and you shall not commit adultery, and don't steal, and don't lie, don't defraud people, honor your father and mother. You know those things. And so he comes back and he says, look, I've kept all of those things since I was a little boy. And Jesus knowing everything, Jesus knowing this guy. If Jesus was having this discussion with Grant at 20, Jesus would say, how about the popularity thing? Is the popularity thing more important to you than me? I mean, let's deal with the popularity thing. And Jesus would say to Grant at 20, would you be willing to be unpopular if that's what it took to serve me and to know me? Would you be willing to give up the thing that you've put ahead of me so that I can be the king of your life? Or would you instead say, no, I'm going to cling on to the popularity because that's more important to me than Jesus? And Jesus knew that this guy, it was popularity, it was status, and more importantly, it was money. This guy had a lot of money. And so Jesus knew that there was something that this guy, even though that he had been following the Ten Commandments, he knew that for this guy there was something that was more important to him than Jesus. And so Jesus comes right back and he puts it right on the line, just as if he would say to Grant at 20, would you be willing to be less popular if it meant me? And so he comes back and he says to this guy, Jesus looked at him and loved him, which means it's like, oh, you're so wrong, but I love you so much. I just love you. And he says, one thing you lack, go and sell everything that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then you can come and follow me. It would be like him saying to Grant at 20, one thing that you lack, you love popularity and your status in high school more than you love me. So would you be willing to trade that? Would you be willing to be less popular if it meant putting me first and letting me be the king of your life? Decide, would you rather? And Jesus would say the same thing to you. If there's something that is equal or more important to you in your life than Jesus, Jesus looks at you right now and he says, would you be willing to give that up and put me in place. And if you do, it says the treasure of heaven, it says, I will take care of you. If you trade your popularity for me, I'll work that out. You'll never regret that. You'll love that. It'll be better for you. I'll work that out. Or if it's money that you worship more than me, if you trade in your love for money, I'll work that out. The treasures of heaven will be released into your life, and I'll work that out. But you have to decide, is it me or the thing that you worship? And so it's Grant at 20. Now, as we close today, here's what I'm going to ask you to consider. Is there anything more important to you, or just as important to you as Jesus? And would you be willing to sell your soul for it? Here's what I want to ask you. Let's pretend that you're Grant at 20. The whole thing with Grant at 20 is that one day he woke up and realized that kind of it went on. And the one day that Jesus talks to this man who had put money over everything else, Jesus was trying to say, one day, life is kind of going to go on. Your whole love of high school and putting status and money before me, one day that's not going to be there. And it'll be just left to, what did you decide? Was it me? Or was it your love for money, status, and fame?